The spiritual climate is changing, and young people, Gen Z and Gen Alpha in particular, are more open than ever to the gospel of Jesus. What does it look like to equip the young people in our churches to share their faith? And especially when evangelism gives you the ick. What do we do when many youth leaders and church leaders feel uncomfortable about evangelism? I'm Melanie Cave, Managing Director of Roots, and today I'm speaking with Aaron Routledge, who is passionate about helping young people share their faith. You'll hear some amazing facts about bananas, yes, bananas, and we'll reflect on how culture has shifted and what needs to change in how we share faith. And we finish with some inspiring and encouraging stories, as well as ways to equip our young people. Lean in. Even if evangelism does give you the ick, God has got something for you in this. Thanks for joining us on the Roots for Churches podcast. Here we go. Aaron, welcome to the Roots for Churches podcast. Really good to have you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks for having me on.
We're going to talk about young people sharing faith. And I want to pick your brains because you've got a passion around this area.
Yeah.
Can you start off by telling us a bit about how you got involved in youth work and evangelism?
Begrudgingly, basically, is how I got involved. I think that my first experience actually was when I was about 14 years old. And I'm a church kid, so I was basically raised by the local church. And we were doing this mission out in my local area, a place called Enfield Town. And I had a heart, but I had no ability to share the gospel. I knew what it was. I think I knew what I believed, but I couldn't articulate it. So a friend of mine, a mentor at the time, said, if you go through this box of gospel tracts, pick one out and just learn the script and then go for that. So I pick out these gospel tracts and I find one that's all about the intelligent design argument. In other words, the world's so finely tuned, there must be a God. I start reading all these facts about the world and creation, and I stumble across this one about the banana. Now, for context, I love bananas, banana bread, bananas in pajamas, foam bananas, banana milkshake, I love bananas. So I'm reading this thing and it's telling me all about how amazing the banana is. So, it tells you when it's ready to eat. Brown too soft, green too hard, yellow just right. Has 6 sides that are different shapes. And when you close your hand and to hold a banana, it has 6 sides to it that are slightly different shapes. It's like it's perfectly been designed to fit into the human hand. It has a waxy skin on the outside, so it doesn't get ruined by the rain. And so I was like, this is unbelievable. I'm getting blown away by the banana. So I think this is what I'm going to lead with. So I pick my 2 victims and I see them. I'd love to say it was the Holy Spirit leading me. It was definitely my hormones, and because they were good looking girls. And I thought, I'm going to go and talk to them. So
About bananas.
So my opening line to these poor girls is, hi, my name's Aaron. Have you ever seen a banana before? And they obviously burst into, just like you, burst into laughter. But I am so focused and locked in and passionate about, sharing about banana, that I just go on for 5 minutes about bananas and telling them all that I've learned, my newfound knowledge. And I've come to the crescendo of my sort of sermon on the banana. And I'm thinking, this is it. Here we go. And so I come into land, I say, and so because of the banana, there must be a God. Would you like to put your trust in Jesus today? And I'd love to say the heavens were rendered and the Holy Spirit himself descended upon these 2 girls, and right there and then they were convicted of their sin and gave their life to Jesus. That isn't what happened. I sort of came to my senses and I thought, I'm just being laughed at. This is the most embarrassing thing I've ever done. I'm never doing this again. And I got so angry with God because, again, I'm 14, so you have to sort of forgive me.
Yeah.
I'm getting so angry. I'm like, you've abandoned me. You said you'd never leave or forsake me. Where were you in this moment? I am never doing this again. I'm way too cool for this. There's not a chance that I'm going to do evangelism. And I literally make a vow to God in that moment. I'm like, I'm never doing this again. And I pretty much lived my life all the way through uni in a Christian bubble. Went to uni, did theology, got thrown into church, lived with Christian housemates. But it was when I came back from uni, I wanted to work part-time for my church. And I had 2 rules. I'm not doing any evangelism and I'm not working with young people. And I always find it's dangerous to start, giving conditions to God because he'll break them. And in the space of about 3 months, God really met with me and sort of reframed the way that I thought about discipleship to Jesus, about young people, and about evangelism, it was really from I would guess like a deep encounter with God, where that really changed for me on a park bench. I could take you to it now. It's a very special spot to me, where God changed my mind on loads of things. And it came out of a question a friend of mine, or a pastor friend of mine, asked me. He said, Aaron, my young people are quite apathetic about their friends coming to know Jesus. Why do you think that is? And when he asked that question, something in me was literally birthed. And I said, I'm really sorry, I've got to go. I didn't answer the question. I left this building and just walked in tears to this park bench. And I sat down. I said, God, what's happened? I don't understand what's happening. And he began to speak to me about young people and about the gospel and about evangelism. And from there, really, from that moment, there was a bunch of stuff that happened in terms of my brain and the way I thought about these things. But that was really the moment for me where God met me, and it was very reluctantly. I didn't want to do any of it, but God gave me a vision for working with young people. He gave me a heart for that. He gave me a heart for the lost, and he gave me a heart for putting those two things together. How do we help young people reach their friends for Jesus? So that was really how it started. It wasn't anything I did. It was something that God gifted me, I think.
And I have to know, have your banana facts ever resurfaced again in evangelism conversation since then?
They are yet to, but it does make for a funny story wherever I go.
I think if you're converting people to minions, perhaps,
Exactly.
So does evangelism ever give you the ick?
It can do. I think sometimes it gives me the ick, not because in and of itself it's wrong, but I've been conditioned to believe that it's wrong. So we live in a worldview. Part of that postmodern secular worldview is that the top of the moral tree is tolerance. So the idea is the more tolerant I am, the more moral I am. And we want to be moral people. Like, we used to have the monopoly on that as Christians. We were like, we're the moral people. And so in a worldview that says tolerance is the highest form of morality, when the gospel, which in and of itself starts with a basis that says the human heart is broken, that we're flawed, that flies in the face of, that feels like, it's not very tolerant to say something like that. And so it feels like, am I wrong for telling someone that they might be wrong, or they might be broken, or they might need fixing, or they might need saving? Is that wrong? Is that immoral? Is that intolerant of you? So I think there is a nervousness that we have inbuilt that I think we need to check, because I think tolerance is a really poor standard. It's so low. I think love
It's much lower than love. Yeah.
Love is a better standard. Love is the highest form of morality. It always should be. And love doesn't tolerate things that aren't good.
Yeah.
Love has to call it out. It's what it does. We know that from raising a child. There's certain things I can't tolerate, because it would be unloving for me to tolerate that, because it's not setting them up well for the world, because the world won't let me get away with it. And so out of love, I discipline. Out of love, I set boundaries. God in his love disciplines. God in his love has set boundaries. And I think for us, we have to check, is this a worldview that's been formed in me, that's coming up, and I need to resist that and actually say, no, call that out for what that is. That's a wrong feeling there, and not to be led by that. And so I think we've got to notice that. That's sometimes why I think evangelism gives us an ick.
Yeah, and so I feel like Gen Z really doesn't like conflict. And evangelism is this sort of sense where you feel like I'm coming into conflict with somebody else's beliefs. Now, it doesn't have to be conflict. It can be curiosity. It can be relationship. Yes. It can be a conversation. But I think we've lost the art of conversation, maybe. That we're not used to relationship. We're not used to friendship, where we tend to have friends who agree with us. Not always, but I think it's more and more, and our algorithms and all sorts of things like that tend to feed us stuff that agrees with us. And so it feels really challenging to be in a situation where you are perhaps confronting a worldview or coming up against something that is different to what you believe. How do you do that with respect, with kindness, with love? It can be done. We don't see a lot of it
Mhm.
modeled on our politics or on our televisions or anything, but
Yeah.
it can be done. We can do conversations. We can disagree well. We can
Yeah.
do conflict in a way that brings us closer.
Yes.
But those skills are sorely missing. And maybe that's what we need to be talking about in our youth groups.
Yeah. And that's why I think the questioning, asking good questions is really helpful for that, or getting on the offensive in an inoffensive way. So you cause someone to question their own worldview. So why do you think like that? Or where has that come from? How strongly do you believe that? And when you get people to sort of extrapolate why they believe something, often if the foundations, if they've just been taught it or it's just a narrative that they've been fed, they won't have a robust answer. And so you can gently suggest and go, I would suggest that maybe you have a worldview you don't fully believe, or it doesn't sound like you're super convicted about what you believe. And here's where the really good news comes in. Christianity as a worldview is tried and tested for like 2,000 plus years. A lot of thought has gone into it, and it has some robust answers to why we believe what we believe. And it has some really good answers to solve some of the, human problems that we experience. So you can actually be quite confident in that, not in an arrogant way or a boastful way, but don't be afraid of getting your friends to question their worldview. The onus isn't always on you to prove everything. Sometimes actually asking your friends to say, well, you tell me why you believe what you believe. How confident are you in what you think about the world? And where does that come from? And how's it going for you? I think are good questions to ask.
Yeah. Often I think Jesus often leaves the question unanswered. He leaves something that I want to call it like an earworm, but it's more like a brainworm. He leaves the parable uninterpreted. He leaves the question unanswered, partially because our brains are always after closure. And so if he told you the answer, you'd be like, that's the answer. The answer is Jesus, whatever. But if he leaves it unanswered, your brain keeps working on it. And I think that's a genius teaching method. Like, don't solve everything. Leave the questions so that they keep working it out in their own way and keep asking the question. And I think sometimes the church errs too much on telling everybody exactly what's what.
Yeah.
If we leave things a bit more open-ended, we create curiosity and pursuit and interest and intrigue, which keeps people coming back for more. So, yeah.
And it's so much better to be in a position where they're coming back to have a conversation with you than you needing to try and instigate one again.
Yeah.
And I think a friend of mine once called it the earworm. They said, leave a pebble in their shoe. So as they walk off, there's like, what that thing's just still there, and
it's niggling,
niggling at me. So
it's good. So why do you think so many Christians find evangelism challenging?
Yeah, I think it's often done in unnatural ways. Evangelism is ultimately the sharing of good news. You don't share good news with people, your circle, or with the world. Like if you had something great happen to you, it's very rare you walk up to strangers or stand on a soapbox on a street corner and shout that to lots of people. That isn't necessarily what you do. I'm not saying there's no place for that, but for a lot of us, it feels really unnatural to just walk up to strangers or stand on street corners. And that is so much of the evangelism that we see modeled, or that we see practiced, or we see platformed. And so I think very often Christians find it challenging because they're not in spaces or seeing it modeled in a way that's more natural to their everyday life. And on top of that, it feels awkward, especially in a context like Britain. I know it's not the same everywhere else, but we're quite protective over our, we don't want to talk too much about politics and religion, and, especially in a work context. And most Christians are, spend most of their time with non-Christians in a workspace or capacity. You're not allowed to do it there or in the way that we do it. So I think it's a lot about it happening. It's modeled in an unnatural way. And I think that sometimes is unhelpful. And that's why often we find it quite challenging. And so, yeah.
And do you think that's also because Christians are not around enough non-Christians? So they literally have to, when they say go and share your faith, all their closest friends are from church or their family members are Christians. So they have to go and find a complete stranger to go and talk to. And that's obviously not the case for young people who are likely in a school surrounded by people who have different faiths or no faiths. Can you help me just think big picture? How do you think evangelism has changed, say, in your lifetime or the last 20 years? What's shifting? Because we are hearing reports of everything shifting. People are more open, young people are more confident. But what's changed?
Yeah.
Obviously, besides the Holy Spirit moving, which is definitely, I think, something that's going on. But what's shifted around evangelism?
That's a fantastic question. I think our worldview has shifted and changed a little bit. I mean, when I grew up, I'm 30 years old. I'm not like, I'm still growing up, I think. But when I was at school, when I think about 15 years ago, the conversations were around almost like still science versus religion. That sort of paradigm was still there. Science has all the answers, and being a Christian, I was a good person, morally a good person, but I was a bit dumb for believing in God. It was a bit silly of me to believe in something like that. And I think that's moved, that's changed. I think I had this death of what I'd call like the postmodern secular worldview. And that script that young people have been fed, or this idea of there is no God, so secular, yourself is at the center of everything, and postmodern being that there isn't this universal truth, and your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth, and we need to live in a world where we tolerate that. I think that script has made young people sick. I think our souls have died, and I think actually people are desperate for something that is more than just the material, and they're open spiritually. And so now the conversations are, Christianity has something to say into that space for a lot of people. It's really interesting for them, or they're intrigued because they're spiritually open. They recognize they're more than just a physical being. They have this soul that needs to be fed and met, and these needs, that's, in so many ways, we're more anxious than ever, we're more lonely than ever, we're more burnt out than we've ever been. And so people are like, maybe this isn't working, I need to feed my soul. And so we're spiritually open. I think that's interesting. That's one thing that's changed. And the other one is, I think we've also moved to, and I think this is connected because of that spiritual piece. Traditionally, this is where I think we need to pivot a little bit, or need to do some thinking around it. We've always presented the gospel through a guilt innocence worldview. Evangelism, we often talk about three worldviews: guilt, innocence, fear, power, and shame and honor. And they're different cultures that exist. And in the UK, in the West, we've typically been a guilt innocence worldview. And maybe you might say somewhere like sort of South America, maybe Africa would be a fear and power worldview, and then certain Asian countries would be, or East Asia would be, a shame and honor. And I think we're not in a guilt innocence worldview anymore. I don't meet young people who think they're guilty or have any shame about who they are. They've been told to not be ashamed about who they are. But I do think we're in a dynamic of that fear and power in the West, this sense of like, they feel very powerless. I mean, take the geopolitical stuff that's going on at the moment. Young people just feel like, this is happening to me and I am powerless to do anything about that. They feel powerless against, I guess, the systems that are working against them. That would be language they might use. But also they feel powerless internally. Like, I can't set myself free from this anxiety or this fear that I have. And the gospel speaks into that. And maybe more of a Christus Victor theory of atonement, and that we talk about Jesus is victorious over the principalities and powers. So there are dark forces in the world, but Jesus has overcome them. And so actually God has overcome our fear. God has overcome our anxiousness, and he's brought about peace. And that speaks into people. So I think, two things. How has it changed? I think one, the worldview has changed in the West from guilt innocence to maybe more fear power, especially among young people. And then second, they're more open. They're looking for spiritual experiences. And so, I might add a third one actually, if that's all right.
Go on there.
The third one would be that I think they're skeptical of systems and institutions. And part of that's been learned. So they've seen those institutions maybe fail them, or they feel like it's failed them. It hasn't come through on its promises. Governments haven't come through on their promises. They feel like, how am I ever going to own a home? Or, and that's the government's supposed to help me with all that stuff, that my lifestyle will be able to be a point where I could do that. They feel like their church has failed them in lots of ways as an institution. We've seen lots of that sort of dismantling of, or exposing of, moral failure. And so they feel burnt out by that, or burnt by that. And so they are, I think the typical, hey, come to church is less inviting for them because they don't instinctively trust it. And so we're actually seeing a lot more happening in the homes of young people. So it's like, rather than come to church, it's like, do you want to come to my house and read the Bible together? Or the digital space, because there's a safety. They can consume the content when they want to. And so they go away and do their research. And the digital space, we're seeing some phenomenal stuff happen around faith sharing, around the gospel. and young people engaging with Christianity there. And two, in the home, in the safety of my friendship circles, I'm seeing some of that stuff play out. So I would say, yeah, there's sort of three shifts I think we've seen. So away from institutions towards that relational piece. Gen Z are open, or Gen Alpha are open spiritually, and then also this worldview change from guilt and innocence to maybe fear, power. And I think some of the ways that we communicate the gospel haven't yet transitioned to
Yeah.
meet with those spaces.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Really helpful. So can I reflect back what I'm hearing? So I'm understanding that like maybe in the 2000s, it felt like you had to be good at apologetics. You had to
Yes.
know your Bible backwards and forwards. You had to be able to argue somebody who was an atheist in circles, know your stuff, and then kind of win an intellectual argument. It doesn't feel like you're saying that evangelism is on that. There will still be people who will have big questions and we should have good answers. And we do. But that's less of the platform. It's more, people are more compelled by people who are living a good life. I don't mean necessarily morally good, although that might be part of it. Young people see somebody who's content, who's happy, who's secure in themselves, who's not anxious, and they're like, what's that about?
Yes.
So there's something about that freedom from fear, that modeling a lifestyle, that seems to be compelling and interesting.
Yes.
And I guess the other piece is around, it really is relational. So if it's not like a debate and it's not a come and see, be impressed by the big show at my church, evangelism is more relational. I mean, I can see that in my own teenagers' lives. They like my daughter bought a Bible for her friend for her birthday because that's what she wanted. She never had one, and she's not a Christian.
Wow.
She's like, I want a Bible, and then she's like, come and read it with me,
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, but getting her to come to church, she has since come to church, but it's the journey is longer. But she's much more willing to do things one-on-one with my daughter and talk about her questions, which on one level is incredible. On another level, if you haven't got a confident teenager, feels kind of intimidating. They're like, I want my youth leader to do that. I want my church leader to do that. Now you're asking me to explain the Bible to my friend.
Yeah.
But yeah, so how do we equip? Well, I have so many questions. One is, how do we equip our young people to move and to operate with confidence in this sort of new openness? But also, like, what needs to shift in how we view evangelism? Like, I think we've got a very presentational, I grew up in the 90s. It's like, here's the 4 spiritual laws, or here's the Roman road, or here's this little tract with a gap and the cross bridging the gap.
Yeah.
We had all these sort of methodologies of sharing faith, which explained the gospel. But that doesn't sound like what people, it almost is answering a question nobody's asking anymore. Maybe not universally, but like, what needs to pivot in our evangelism so that we're actually answering the questions that people are asking? I've given you a lot to chew on there, but go for what you like.
No, it's good. I think if I was, let's say I was speaking to your teenage child, and I said, and I was the youth worker, and they felt like, oh, how do I do this? I'd be saying, this is really good. Discover it with your friend. Don't position yourself with all the answers. Position yourself as equally interested in Jesus and learning. And I think that then it's like this invitation to come discover together. And the reality is your child will be further on in their journey than the friend is. I always say, to disciple someone, you just need to be one step ahead of them. That's it. And it is far more like, let's discover this together. And that pressure of your child's not the teacher in that context. Jesus is the teacher. Allow Scripture to be the teacher. The Holy Spirit will teach us. That's Jesus' promise. He will teach, he will remind you about all truth. And so actually lean into that, still being the student or the disciple, the apprentice of Jesus, and leaning that together. And then I think when you're talking about what needs to maybe change in that sense of methodology, 100%. I think back to 14-year-old me, and how I was taught to share my faith was rummage through this box of gospel tracts and pick one and learn one, and that will be how. But the reality is, those two girls, I mean, the poor girls, but I think what a strange interaction for them, that a stranger would just come up to them and start talking, like, it was so unconversational. And I think and I talk about this a lot with teenagers or with youth workers. So I said, we train young people to present the gospel, but they don't know how to have a gospel conversation. And actually, I think we need to shift our training much more towards how do we train you to navigate a gospel conversation rather than just be able to present the gospel. Now, at some point in the conversation, you're going to need to present the gospel. That's true. And we still need to do it, but it is just more nuanced. So, we do this thing called Charge Days as the Message Trust, and we turn up to youth groups and we do training with them. And we journeyed this probably for about 6 years, where we used to do that. We just trained them to present the gospel. We took them out into the street and we would do it with strangers. And the teens had a great time. They loved it. But the feedback was when they went back to school, they're like, I don't know how to turn this 4 points gospel track. It's so weird if I just turn up to my friend and say, have you ever seen the 4 points before? They're like, what are you talking about? And what's going on? And so we actually shifted our training to be around conversations, not just presentations. I don't know if I can go into it a bit if you want, but sort of what we call a model that we call, but what we call the 5 Bs.
Okay.
So the 5 Bs are: be ready, be interested, be honest, leave, be bold. And so the first is be ready, is basically it's a principle, before you talk to people about God, talk to God about people. So be praying for your friends, pray for opportunities to be able to have a gospel conversation. It also puts the weight, theologically, takes the weight off of the young person having to be the one who saves their friends. That's not what you do. God does that. Your job is to tell them about Jesus. 2 is be interested. And this is basically ask really good questions of your friends. Sort of talk about it like you can go on the front foot in an inoffensive way. And so ask your friends about their worldview. Not in a weird way, like what's your worldview, but ask questions like, what do you think about what's going on with all the wars? Or what do you think about this disaster? What do you think about the mental health crisis? And where do you think that's coming from? What do you think happens when we die? What do you think life's about? And it's quite interesting. Or even like, what do you think about God? What do you think about Jesus and the church? And you actually begin to hear your friends' perspective and their worldview. And it's going to arm you so much better to actually scratch where they're itching. And so it's just about asking good questions. One of the best questions you can ask them is, hey, how can I pray for you? And which is very simple, but two things. They'll go, oh, that's really nice. You could pray for this. Do you think prayer works? Or have you ever prayed? It's actually quite wild how many of our friends have prayed. You're like, why did you do that? Because you don't believe it. So why did you do it? They're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe there is something more. So be interested, ask good questions. The second is be honest. And this is about almost talking about the daily impact that Jesus is having, or that God's having in your life. We used to say, like, share your testimony. The problem with that is I think young people think about like how they came to faith, which is often quite boring and really irrelevant for a friend, because they're like, well, that's not my circumstances. And so we're talking about sort of telling a living testimony, or what happened yesterday that God really helped with. And so when your friend says, how are you doing? Can I be honest with you? And even that line, by the way, just draws someone in. Like, oh, they're going to be vulnerable with me. That's quite nice. Can I be honest with you? I woke up this morning and I was just like, I was really scared. What about, we've got this exam coming up and I'm just nervous that if I get it wrong, my future's ruined. But do you know what I did? I just stilled myself and I prayed and I asked Jesus just to give me peace. And do you know what? He just gave me a peace, and I know my future's secure in him. So he's got a plan, a purpose for my life. So now you leave it there. Honestly, this is the difference Jesus is making. They'll do one or two things. They'll say, oh, that's interesting, and not say anything more. Or they'll go, you pray? Or what? Jesus gave you peace. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, now you can invite them into a personal spiritual experience. Do you want some peace? I think Jesus gives peace. I could pray for that for you if you want. So you're in a conversation now. And notice that a lot of these are questions at this point. So it's be interested. It's, can I be honest with you? You're engaged in conversation. I think once you do some of that, you might then get to this point where you can say, can I tell you what I believe? And then that's where you might get into a gospel presentation piece. 2 ones I'd recommend is, one is Life in 6 Words and one is the 4 points. I find them quite helpful. Life in 6 Words is basically it's a gospel acrostic. So GOSPEL. God made us be with him. Our sin has separated us from God. Sins cannot be removed by good deeds. Paying the price for sin, Jesus came and died and rose again. Everyone who puts their trust in him alone will have eternal life, and that life starts now and lasts forever. That's the Life in 6 Words one. And the 4 points is following the sort of 4 spiritual laws. But keep it simple. Don't feel like you've got to give this grand explanation of the gospel. Keep it simple. Let them ask the questions where it doesn't make sense to them. And then you ask the final question. The final question you ask is, be bold, as you say, did you understand? Is there anything did you understand that? Then they'll say yes or no. If they said yes, you go, okay, cool. They understood what I was saying about the gospel. It made sense to them. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, go, what bit didn't make sense? And then that's when you can maybe nuance some of that gospel presentation bit and go into some depth somewhere. And then say, do you want to read the Bible with me? Do you want to come to church? Do you want to come to youth with me? Do you want to receive Jesus? Again, all this is still question based. So that's the 5 B's that we talk about. And it sort of helps navigate. It feels much more like a living conversation with a friend that you could have over months. You might be in the be interested phase for a few weeks with your friends trying to gather information. And then you start to just drop in, hey, can I be honest? This is what God's doing in my life. Yeah, you still haven't, presented the gospel to them, but you are actually engaging in a living conversation. And I think that's often far more natural for people than try and awkwardly force this gospel presentation into a moment that, doesn't make sense or feels jarring to your friend.
Yeah. So it sounds like street evangelism being the primary place where some churches are training people creates this sort of false reality, or the idea that like, I've just got to have some clever opening question that they can't say no to. And then I launch into my presentation. And I was reflecting, like, maybe that has something to do with the way we do church. Like, church is a lot of on a platform. There's always somebody at the front who has all the answers, who's prepped it. And then people come to church and kind of consume it. And we're not as used to interacting in churches. Now, some churches are different, and I really hope churches are getting more interactive. But it's those conversations, those spiritual conversations that we often have in small group, over coffee. Those feel like the real formation things. And if we model our evangelism on preaching, then that's where you get sort of street evangelism. It's modeled on this sort of preacher mentality.
Yeah.
And, you look at a church, there might be 5 or 6 people in a church who preach regularly, but there will be a large church body of believers who are not preachers. But then we're selling this sort of idea that evangelism is like preaching, and it really isn't. It's like conversation. And so, I guess it is coming back to helping teenagers see you're good at conversations. You do this all the time. You're always chatting, whether it's on your phones or while you're gaming or, to your friends hanging out around school. You're good at conversation. Here's a way to ask better questions so that you can have conversations that are about Jesus, about faith, about God.
Yeah.
That feels quite doable. And maybe it takes the pressure off as well of it being this sort of one and done. We're going out to do evangelism as a thing. Whereas actually what we're doing is we're having conversations and we're with our friends.
Yeah.
That feels, again, it feels less pressure.
Yeah.
So it is a shift in how we're teaching, how we're equipping, and what we're expecting that makes it more natural. Feels exciting to me.
Yeah, and I talk about it as almost like because I think it still is both on one level. It's almost the difference between preaching the gospel and sharing the gospel. So when I preach the gospel, there is a clear biblical framework for that. That is maybe the pulpit moment, or I'm stood in front of a group of people, and at my church, I encourage every Sunday there should be a moment where I share the good news of Jesus. It's doing 2 things. One, it's forming my church so they get to learn it, but I always want to give a moment for someone to put their trust in Jesus. And so I'm always going to preach the gospel from the front of those places. But that isn't the reality. That is a very odd communication style. It's not how we communicate on a day-to-day level. So you need almost these 2 ways of doing this. One is, yes, the preached gospel, and that's good and still relevant for today. The gospel has power in and of itself. But if we're going to teach people to share the gospel with friends, and actually equip our churches to do that and mobilize our teenagers to do that, then it's a different communication style altogether. And you're right in your observation, is we are teaching people to we only really teach them to preach the gospel, not to share it. And that's why we end up with, I think, what is visually looks to us like evangelism is street preaching. And it's like, that's one, maybe an element of it, and it's for a very few group of people. Like, it takes a certain personality, I think.
Yeah.
And leaning. And it isn't me either. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not fantastic at it, and I love talking to people, but yeah, so we need those two running parallel with each other. And by the way, I think Alpha's a brilliant example of this. Potentially, and I have no statistics to back this up, but potentially one of the most effective tools of evangelism that the church has in its arsenal at the moment. And it is effective. And it's effective because of this. It's based around conversations.
Yeah.
It's about sharing. It's so much more accessible for people. And it's almost replicating that in your every.
Yeah. I think it is that confidence that, your examples of like the confidence to share spiritual moments or how Jesus makes a difference in your life. And again, like that difference between a living testimony, this is what God did for me this week, versus this is how I became a Christian kind of testimonies. Again, given at the front of church with a microphone, it's that it's all modeled after this sort of preaching model, and that only works in certain settings. And what we're trying to say is there's not a lot of settings currently where young people, or even many of us in the workplace, have an opportunity to preach in that way. So we need the tools of evangelism about sharing, of asking good questions and talking about our lives of faith in more natural ways. And again, that feels odd because a lot of our church is set of us listening to somebody at the front. And it's not interactive. So maybe it's like on Sunday, you just need to get people in pairs, and say, tell them something good that's happened in your life this week. Tell me sometime that God broke through. Tell a story. But that actually is evangelism training. That just chat about God, about what difference God's made. Now, how could you say that to somebody who's not part of church? What would that look like? That kind of training, rather than here's a tract that you need to memorize. And I totally take your point. It is helpful to have something in the back of your mind that helps you succinctly share what Jesus means to you and how we have relationship with him. That is important, but that's not the whole picture. And I think we've majored on that and minored on all the other stuff.
Yeah, correct.
So that feels a bit out of whack. So why do you think some youth leaders or church leaders might not prioritize evangelism or evangelism training? Because I think we're seeing all this stuff. Gen Z is open, Gen Alpha is open, but some youth leaders might be like, now, do you think it's their own cringe from their own time on doing street evangelism? Is it a holdover for that, or is it fear? What's going on? Why would we not prioritize this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think on one level, there's a sense of there is a level where they don't necessarily know how to. Like I have a lot of conversations with youth workers who are like, yeah, I'd love to do that. I don't know how to do that. So I don't have it in me to be able to transfer that to my young people. And I always feel like so much of, if it's not being modeled to your young person, then they're not going to do it. So you can talk about it for a little bit or teach on it and do a series on it. But if they don't see it in your life every day, and you're not talking about it in the way that, are you sharing stories with your young people about, oh, I have my friends over for dinner. Could you pray for me? Because I really I'm being intentional about wanting to share my faith with them. And then you tell them how it went. Oh, it went really well. It went really badly. And here's what I did. Here's, whatever that is. But if it's not being modeled, I think it's because they're in this presentation mode. Some of that, they've inherited some of that model, I think, youth workers. I think the other piece is because they live with this tension, youth workers, between, and I call it's a total false dichotomy, but they talk about, are we going to be, I do this a lot with youth workers, I say, here's a scale. And on one end is discipleship, and on one end is evangelism. Where is your youth ministry? And they're like, oh, we're about discipleship. We're about the deepening and of our young people and their faith in Jesus. And that's what we're about, because Jesus told us to make disciples. And then the other end is like, we're about evangelism. We're running the youth clubs and we're doing the schools work. And we're doing the after schools clubs because Jesus told us to go, and we're about seeing young people. We want to connect with young people so we can tell them about Jesus. And I'm like, I just don't see anywhere in the Bible this framework for these two things to be sort of pitted against each other, or this scale. I actually think good discipleship will mean that you'll mobilize your teenagers. And it's my favorite question to ask youth worker is, how many schools are you in? And they'll tell me, oh, we're in one school, we do some mentoring. So, oh, how many young people have you got? We've got 10 young people at our church. So, okay, how many schools does that represent? They'll say, oh, it's about 4 schools. They go to 4 different schools. So I'm like, oh, you're actually in 4 schools. You're not in one school, you're in 4 schools. You're just not maybe discipling your young people in a way that helps them think about that their school might be their mission field, and that actually to follow Jesus is to be a sharer of Jesus. It's actually who they are. Jesus said, follow me and I will send you. So his promise, if you like, of following him is that he's going to send you. And he has sent them. They're in school. I often say to youth workers that, oh, we don't have any resources to reach young people because we haven't got the staff or the team or the money or the budgets. I say, oh, well, I actually think you have government-funded missionaries in your church. I said, oh, where are they? I said, they're called your young people because they have to go to school and the government pays for them to go to school and the government funds missionaries, but you have chosen to not see them that way. And you haven't chosen you've chosen not to equip them for that. And so, yes, go to school and get good grades and study and enjoy it. It's a good thing. But whilst you're there, because you have to be, and you're there 5 days a week, how are you representing Jesus in those spaces? Are you having those gospel conversations with your friends? And how can we encourage you and build structure in and rhythms that celebrate that and that help cultivate that as a norm in our youth work? So I talk to youth workers and say, like, think about what weekly rhythms you could put in. So maybe every week you ask the question, hey, who here had a gospel conversation with a friend? And you just ask it week after week, even if it's just blank silence for the first 2 months. Because eventually the kids just get sick of it and go, someone say something. And then you celebrate like wild when the young person says, yeah, I did have a conversation with a friend. It didn't go well. Come on, that's amazing. Because it doesn't matter about how it went. It's the fact that they did it. And you celebrate that and you put that in a rhythm. Monthly, have an event that's like, that you curate with your young people that's for their friends. So what would your friends want to come to? Let's create that. Let's create that thing. It doesn't have to be anything crazy or exciting. It could just be food, or it could be
trampoline park, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Whatever it is. And say, okay, cool. This is the one we're going to really invite our friends to. And we're going to go for it in that way. So I think building it into the year, into your program, the curriculum, whatever it is you want to call it, these rhythms of it's normal to be having conversations with our friends about Jesus and giving them a bit of a better vision of what it means to follow Jesus. Because I think young people they don't want comfort, they want a cause. I'm so convinced of that. When I first started in youth work, I sort of sat at the feet of a few youth workers and youth ministries that I thought, from what I've been told, were doing really well. And the common feedback I had was, it's about creating safe spaces for young people. And there was I understood what they were saying, but there was something in it that I wrestled, because I kept reading the Bible and I was like, I don't see that in the life. It's not that they were unsafe around Jesus, but I don't think his prime goal was to make safe spaces for young people to sort of hide away from the world. And it's a mindset shift. I guess some of the stuff that God taught me on that park bench all those years ago now. I remember there's a famous phrase, it's one of my favorite things to say to young people. So, can anyone tell me where the Bible verse is? Be in the world, but not of the world. And all these young people put their hand up. And I'm like, oh, great. Where in the Bible is it? And then no one can ever tell me, because it isn't in the Bible.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. What is in the Bible is probably this. You're not of this world, but you are in it. And there's a direction shift there. Be in the world but not of the world is sort of this retracting from the big bad infectious world is out to get you, and our job as youth workers is to protect them from it. And success means that they basically don't have sex before marriage, and they don't get drunk, and they get to 18 and go to uni and they still have a faith. That's success. Whereas when you flip it and say, no, you're not of this world, you've been born from above, would be Jesus' language, would be, to borrow Jesus' language, born again, a citizen of heaven. That's where you belong. You're not of this world. Embrace that. But you have
Be weird.
Be weird, but you are in it. And God has sent you into it. And John 17 talks about that. He says, like, don't take them out of this world. And as you have sent me, so I send them. And that's a different mindset, I think. It's a releasing mindset, not a retention mindset. And I think in the kingdom of God, when we focus on how do we retain our young people, we lose them. When you focus on how do I release my young people, I think you get back more. It's the story of the talents. When Jesus says,
it's really good.
5-3-1. It says, go and put it to work and your return will be good. The one who has one and just retains it, actually Jesus says, you're wicked and evil, which is pretty harsh. But I think that's what I would say to youth workers is, think about releasing your young people. Don't worry about retaining them, because the moment you try and retain them, you will lose them. And I think we've been in that world for quite some time in terms
I
of
think
youth
you're
work.
right. I think a lot of churches have been worried about, where's the next generation? What are we going to do? How do we hold on to them? Will the church be obsolete in the future?
Mm.
And that generates fear, and fear generates control and holding things more tightly. And so are we strangling the young people by squeezing them so tightly to hold on to them? Don't leave, like, how can we make sure that children who are in the church don't leave when they hit 11, when they have the choice to stay home if their parents don't bring them, that kind of stuff. We get really panicky that we're going to lose them. And I get that fear. We all want our children to grow up. We want them to be safe. So, like, as a parent, I think we both agree, like, we want our kids to be safe. We want our kids to be surrounded by good influences that be in the world and not of the world. That feels like, it feels comforting as a parent. You're like, oh, phew, I can hide them away and bubble wrap them and they won't get broken. But, like, you end up with a sort of teenage adult, or, mollycoddled kid who expects everything is spoiled. That's, you get entitlement. You don't get the leaders that we need in our church because we've not released them. So our desire to protect and to sort of hoard basically kind of makes us a bit crazy, I think. Yeah. And so it's that, you're right, we've got to release. Jesus sent, the 72 out in pairs, and they were really not very equipped. You're like, and they come back and they tell all these great stories, and you're like, really? I was not expecting that to go as well as it did.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Jesus is like, brilliant, And so it's like the same way with the teenagers, like, you kind of send them out and you give them these opportunities. Yes. And then the Holy Spirit goes with them and you're like, wow, I did not expect that to go as well. And there's, I don't know if it's God's grace on beginners. I often think there's things that I did when I was a teenager that if I tried it now, it totally wouldn't work,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
God shows up when we step out in crazy faith and blesses stuff that you're like, strategically or even evangelistically or anything like that, it's not, it makes no sense. It's not a good plan. Don't roll it out, but I'll bless it because it's you and you're taking a risk. But God seems to use these teenagers. He will take risks if we all let them.
Yes, I think you're so right. And it's that sense, again, that I come back to that, give them a cause to live for, not overly trying to comfort them. They want cause over comfort, and the Holy Spirit will comfort them. That's who Jesus promised. He said, he's the comforter. So don't let him hold up his end of the bargain. So don't be so afraid of the world to release them into it, to give them a cause. What happens when it goes wrong? It will. The good news is God has promised. He said, I've sent you a comforter. Let him do what he does best. He's better at comforting our young people than we are. But yeah.
And that's how they develop some spiritual muscles, some resilience, some leadership, is by having a go rather than being handheld the whole time. But yeah, it does feel scary. And so come give us some resources, some training, some ways forward, because all of this feels like it is a mindset change, but it's also, as you say, we're pivoting out of sort of maybe 90s 2000 model, which was more presentational, to this conversational model. People are listening and going, what I grew up with maybe isn't what's going to work here. Where can they find resources or training to help equip the youth leaders or the church leaders who want to do this with their young people?
Yeah, great. It's really helpful. So I think research that I'd point you towards is something called A Generation in Reach. It's called by Dare to Share, which is an American organization, but some of the research I think is transferable to a couple of contexts, UK included in that. But they have this thing called Gospel Advancing Leaders, and it's about but they did this big research piece around the difference that happens for a youth group when they take on a few of these principles or mindset changes. So it's Gospel Advancing Leader. If you just Dare to Share Gospel Advancing, it will come up. I'd encourage you to read that research. It's really encouraging. And then in terms of some places or things that your young people get involved in that would serve some of this, I'm involved in something called Amplify, which is a collection of youth ministries that come together to run it. It's a beautiful unity piece, actually, partnership piece. But it's basically a 6-month academy for young people who are teenage in age, so as long as they're in secondary school, who have a bit of a desire to grow in their sharing faith or in their evangelism. And it's young people from all across the UK come together. We do 2 residentials at the beginning of the 6 months, one in October and one in March. So one to start it, one to end it. And then in between that, we do these sort of small groups online, and it's done by age groups. And we have some mentors who sort of sit with them and take them through some of the material. But what's phenomenal is this peer-to-peer encouragement of one another. And the sort of see at the beginning of this residential and they see at the end of the residential. And the beauty is you have a second and third year option. And so sometimes you have second years who are on the first residential telling the stories, and the young people who are the first year hearing them and going, I want to be like that. I can do that in my context. And then they journey with these small groups. And in the second residential, you're hearing all the stories from the first years of this is what God's done in these 6 months. And these are my friends who are either reading the Bible with me or have come to my Christian union or have come to church or have placed their trust in Jesus and been baptized. I mean, honestly, we did this bit of the last residential, and we just opened the floor to testimonies, and it took about an hour just to get through these testimonies of these young people. It was just, we had to send some kids back to their seats because it was sort of like, it was, we were like, oh, we actually do need to move on. We sort of allowed 20 minutes for it or so, but it was just such a phenomenal time. So that's called Amplify. It's open to young people. They basically need a reference from their youth worker, but yeah, I'd encourage you to
I'd endorse
check
it.
out.
My son's on it. He's loved
there you
it.
go.
I'd say get in there early. He's doing it during his A-levels, which is really hard work balancing.
Yeah.
Like get in there younger. But yeah, it's fantastic. And the group chats are electric, they egg each other on in faith. And it's so encouraging, like just, I'm going to go talk to this, or I'm speaking at my school about this, or I'm doing this. And they just, the prayer, the encouragement that flows, it's really beautiful peer to peer.
Yeah, it is.
And as you say, it's like that you might be in a really small youth group where you only have one or two, and you think, how can I fan the flames of this? And this is a great way to do that, of connecting young people across the country who have this similar passion. Yeah. Fabulous. Yeah. It's really good.
And then the other one I'd point to is, so the organization I work for is the Message Trust. And we do this thing called The Charge, which what is it called? This thing called the Charge Days. So we come to you as a youth group and we do a day of training with you, with your young people and your team, youth workers. We talk about some of these principles. We do the 5 Bs training, and then we go out together into your community and we practice those 5 Bs. But we're really conscious. We've been talking about street preaching and not the way to do it. We do it is because we want to give them a space to practice and have a go, because we really believe in modeling something to them. And so the youth workers always go first, then the young people. We come back together and we celebrate what God does, and then we give you some resources to sustain that long term. And I'd encourage you to do that. Or there's this thing we do called the Scattering, which is a mission week in the summer, 7 days. We do it in different locations: London, the north, east of England, and Wales. And it's young people come from all over the place. They do some training, and then we split them into small groups to work with local churches. And for 5 days, they just do mission with that local church. And so it's a fantastic experience for young people. It's mission, it's local, it's absolutely the highlight of my year every year, watching these young people step out in faith and boldness and watch them grow. Because I have found when you get a young person on mission, it really accelerates their discipleship process. Yeah, there'd be some things I'd say. So gospel advancing leaders there to share, amplify, and then the Charge, which is run by the Message Trust.
Brilliant. Well, finishing up, will you tell me some stories that really are encouraging you about sharing faith right now?
Yeah, sure.
It's dangerous asking an evangelist to tell us some stories,
No, so what? I'll share one of me, and then I'll share one of some young people.
Perfect.
Just I think helps maybe give some context to some of the stuff we've been talking about worldview change. So in my me in my barber chair, his name's Luca, my barber, and young guy. He's about 22 years old. He's a bit of a hustler, likes hustle culture. But sat in a chair, and he said, "So what is it you do?" I said, "Oh," I started telling him about what I did. And he said, "Man, I'm so interested in that stuff. Do you pray?" I said, "Yeah, I pray." And we got talking about prayer. And then he said, "And so, is it real? Is it true?" He said, "I think I've had some spiritual encounters." And now at this point, the whole barbershop begins to sort of quieten down. And I sort of start to notice the only people talking is me and my barber, but the whole barbershop is starting to listen. And everyone's leaning in. And it became this moment where my haircut took about an hour and a half, but it became this moment where all these questions. And there were people leaning in, asking genuine, authentic questions of like, what's the difference this is making in your life? Or what do you think about angels? What do you think about, essentially prophecy? And I just got to talk quite openly about some of this stuff. And then I got to pray for a couple of them, and as I'm sat in this barber chair, still with the sort of thing on or whatever it is. And it was that, and I'm now journeying with my barber. I'm trying to get him along to Alpha at the moment. But the sense of this whole room became so open, and that is so anecdotally true. This sense of people are looking for something. Just a couple of stories of some young people. One of the person I was working with has been trying to run a Christian union in their school, and had a bit of resistance from the teachers and the head teacher. And eventually the head teacher just basically said to her, "You're so persistent. There must be something to this. Would you mind if you came to my office once a week and we read the Bible together?" And this young person is reading the Bible with their head teacher.
What?
And the head teacher's asking these questions to this young person. It's just like, I'm like,
So cool.
This is unbelievable. I can't believe this. We had a young person on Amplify who basically decided to run a youth alpha in his school. The long and short of it is 60 young people gave their life to Jesus or made a commitment. There wasn't an adult who went into this school. This was organized by teenagers, run by teenagers, resourced by teenagers, and people coming to faith. But my favorite one, and this is one that I just hold so dear, is a girl called Hannah who I work with, or who we know. We work with her youth leader, but she's quite shy, quite an introvert, and so typically the evangelist model doesn't work for her, and so she's just been faithfully having conversations with friends. I met with her to chat through how it was going, have a conversation with her, and she said, "It's quite difficult because I feel like I get rejected a lot." I said, "Oh, that's a shame." She said, "But it's okay, because Jesus said, if we suffer with him, then we will also share in his glory." And I thought, I can't, and I was so delighted, because it was that sense of, if you can have that attitude for the rest of your life, that it's okay to be rejected. Consistently, I'm just going to keep sharing. I'm just going to keep talking to my friends. I was like, that's the goal. That's what we're after. That if these teenagers would be get to that place where, hey, so what if I get rejected? It's okay. Jesus was rejected too. But the success of this is not in loads of people come to faith. The success of this is that I'm being faithful to what Jesus has asked me to do and what he's called me and equipped me to do. And that's all we're ever asking them to do. That's what we're calling them to. Not a life of loads of people in their life coming to faith, but a life of being consistent to what Jesus asked them to do. And that just really blessed me and encouraged me. So yeah, we're seeing some phenomenal stuff, but that one in particular was just a real blessing to me. And just, such a beautiful attitude and heart, really.
I love it. Thank you, Aaron, for your passion, for what you're doing, for how you're envisioning and equipping young people and youth leaders. I am so encouraged. Just grinning from ear to ear at hearing these stories. You know, it's like tears in your eyes, and this sense of like God's on the move and we can be part of it. And but also, I think, thank you also for your helpful reflections on that. Something has shifted in our culture, and we need to lean in. We need to turn towards that shift rather than keep applying the same old things we did 20 years ago. That culture has moved, and so we need to move too. So I think this has been really helpful, and I'll definitely put links to all the things you've mentioned in the show notes so people can get involved. Sure. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, a joy. Thanks, Melanie.
Roots is committed to helping you lead great church that's growing, relevant, engaging, authentic, and together. We're currently in an article series called Reimagining Evangelism, exploring the fresh ways churches are sharing faith, what's working, what's changed, and what resources do we need to do it. We're also looking specifically at how we can equip and encourage young people to share faith. So check the show notes for links to articles and the resources Aaron mentioned. If you're not familiar with Roots, we serve over 11,000 churches in the UK, Ireland, and around the world. We publish fresh articles, podcasts, Bible notes to support preachers, insight on current events, prayers, intercessions, song and hymn suggestions, intergenerational service outlines, and Bible-based content for children, youth, and toddlers. Phew, that's a lot. And that's the idea. We've got everything you need to lead worship, Bible study, small groups, and share the story of Jesus with your community. We are a partnership of many denominations and Christian organisations working together to resource the church. Our content is published in the order of the Revised Common Lectionary, with common worship variations for the Church of England, where the Bible readings vary. But if that's not your church's tradition of reading through Scripture, you can search our 25-year archive of content covering the majority of the Bible to find engaging and creative preaching, worship and storytelling resources, all for a very affordable annual subscription. Head to rootsforchurches.com to take a free trial. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, share it with your friends and network, and leave us a review so that others can find it. Together, we can grow.